Sarah Martinez had always been different from other kids in her small Texas town. While her classmates played with dolls or video games, she was outside climbing trees, building forts, and challenging the neighborhood boys to wrestling matches. Her parents, Maria and Carlos Martinez, owned a small auto repair shop, and Sarah spent countless hours there after school, learning to fix engines and handle tools that were twice her size. At 12 years old, Sarah was already taller than most girls her age, with calloused hands and a determined glint in her dark brown eyes that made adults take notice. She had this habit of staring directly at people when they spoke, absorbing every word like she was memorizing it for a test later. Her teachers often commented on her unusual focus and drive, qualities that seemed almost too intense for someone so young. The Martinez family lived in a modest house on Elm Street, where the American flag flew proudly from their front porch every single day. Carlos was a Vietnam veteran who rarely spoke about his service, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable whenever he talked about serving his country. He would often find Sarah in the garage late at night, reading military history books by the dim light of a work lamp, completely absorbed in stories of courage and sacrifice. Maria worried about her daughter's obsession with all things military. She wanted Sarah to have a normal childhood, to be interested in clothes and makeup like other teenage girls. But Sarah seemed immune to these typical adolescent concerns. Instead, she spent her free time doing push-ups in her bedroom, timing herself on obstacle courses she created in their backyard, and pestering her father for stories about military life. When Sarah turned 15, something happened that would change everything. The local high school had invited a group of Navy SEALs to speak at an assembly about military careers. Most students saw it as a break from regular classes, but Sarah arrived early and claimed a front-row seat, notebook in hand, ready to absorb every detail. The speaker that day was Chief Petty Officer Michael Rodriguez, a decorated SEAL with 20 years of service. He was shorter than Sarah had expected, but there was something about his presence that commanded immediate attention. He spoke quietly, forcing the entire auditorium to lean forward to hear him, and his eyes seemed to make contact with every student in the room. Rodriguez talked about the SEAL training program, known as BUD/S, where only 25% of candidates successfully complete the course. He described the physical and mental challenges, the teamwork required, and the unwavering commitment needed to serve at the highest level. But what captured Sarah's attention wasn't the talk of glory or adventure. It was something else entirely. The most important quality of a SEAL, Rodriguez said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium, isn't physical strength or intelligence. It's the ability to keep going when everything inside you is screaming to quit. When your body is broken, when your mind is exhausted, when the mission seems impossible, that's when a real SEAL shows who they are. Sarah felt something click inside her chest, like a puzzle piece falling into place. She had always known she was different, but she had never been able to put that feeling into words. Now, listening to this man describe the kind of person who could endure anything and still push forward, she finally understood what she was meant to do with her life. After the assembly, while other students rushed to lunch, Sarah approached the stage where Rodriguez was packing up his presentation materials. She waited patiently until he noticed her, then introduced herself with the same directness she brought to everything else in her life. "Chief Rodriguez," she said, extending her hand for a firm handshake. "I want to become a Navy SEAL." Rodriguez paused, studying the determined teenager standing before him. He had given this presentation at dozens of schools, and he was used to enthusiastic responses from young people caught up in the moment. But there was something different about this girl, a seriousness that went beyond typical teenage bravado. "That's a big goal," he replied carefully. "What makes you think you have what it takes?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Because I've never quit anything in my life, and I don't plan to start now." Something in her tone made Rodriguez take a closer look. He spent the next 20 minutes talking with Sarah, asking questions about her background, her motivations, and her understanding of what military service really meant. He was impressed by her thoughtful answers and her obvious preparation. She had clearly researched SEAL training extensively and understood the challenges involved. Before leaving, Rodriguez gave Sarah his business card and made her promise to stay in touch. He also gave her some advice that would stick with her for years to come. If you're serious about this, start preparing now. Physical fitness is just the beginning. You need to develop mental toughness, learn to work with others, and prove to yourself that you can handle whatever life throws at you. That conversation became the turning point in Sarah's life. She threw herself into preparation with the same intensity she brought to everything else, but now she had a clear target to aim for. She joined every sports team her school offered, from cross-country running to swimming to wrestling. She wasn't naturally gifted at any of these activities, but she made up for it with sheer determination and an unwillingness to accept defeat. Her coaches quickly learned that Sarah was different from other athletes. When practice ended, she would stay behind to do extra laps or work on techniques she hadn't mastered yet. When she lost a race or a match, she would immediately ask what she could do differently next time. She never made excuses, never complained about unfair treatment, and never let setbacks discourage her for more than a few minutes. At home, Sarah's training regimen became legendary in the Martinez household. She woke up at 5:30 every morning to run 3 miles before school, spent her lunch periods in the weight room, and devoted her evenings to studying military strategy and tactics. Her bedroom walls were covered with training schedules, fitness charts, and inspirational quotes from famous military leaders. Maria and Carlos watched their daughter's transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. They were amazed by her dedication and work ethic, but they worried about the intensity of her focus. Sarah seemed to have little interest in typical teenage activities. She rarely went to parties, didn't date, and turned down invitations to hang out with friends if they conflicted with her training schedule. Mija, Carlos said one evening as he found Sarah doing sit-ups in the garage, "You need to remember that life is about more than just training. You should enjoy being young." Sarah paused her exercise routine and looked up at her father with that same intense stare she had perfected over the years. "Dad, I am enjoying it. This is what makes me happy. When I'm training, when I'm pushing myself to be better, that's when I feel most alive." Carlos recognized something familiar in his daughter's expression, the same look he had seen in the mirror during his own military service. He realized that Sarah wasn't just going through a phase or chasing a childhood dream. She had found her calling, and nothing was going to deter her from pursuing it. As Sarah's junior year progressed, her reputation spread throughout the school and the community. Teachers pointed to her as an example of dedication and goal setting. Younger students looked up to her as a role model. Local newspaper reporters wrote articles about the teenage girl who was training to become one of the military's elite warriors. But with recognition came new challenges. Some classmates resented Sarah's single-minded focus and accused her of showing off or trying to be better than everyone else. Others questioned whether a woman could really succeed in such a male-dominated field, making snide comments about her appearance and suggesting she would never be tough enough for SEAL training. Sarah learned to ignore the criticism, but it wasn't always easy. There were nights when she lay in bed wondering if she was crazy to pursue such an impossible dream. The statistics were against her. Not only was SEAL training incredibly difficult for anyone, but women had only recently been allowed to attempt it, and none had successfully completed the program yet. During these moments of doubt, Sarah would remember Chief Rodriguez's words about keeping going when everything seemed impossible. She would think about the look in his eyes when he described the kind of person who could endure anything and still push forward. And she would remind herself that someone had to be first. Someone had to prove that it could be done. The turning point came during a particularly difficult wrestling practice in the spring of her junior year. Sarah was sparring with Jake Morrison, a senior who outweighed her by 40 pounds and had never forgiven her for beating him in a 5K race the previous fall. Jake was known for his aggressive style and his tendency to bend the rules when he thought he could get away with it. During their match, Jake grabbed Sarah's arm and twisted it behind her back in a move that wasn't technically illegal, but was clearly intended to cause pain rather than score points. Sarah felt something pop in her shoulder, but she refused to cry out or ask for a break. Instead, she used her legs to flip Jake over her head, scoring 2 points and winning the match. It wasn't until after practice that Sarah realized how badly she had been injured. Her shoulder was swelling rapidly, and she could barely lift her arm above her waist. The team trainer took one look at her and immediately sent her to the emergency room, where X-rays revealed a dislocated shoulder and torn ligaments that would require surgery. As Sarah lay in the hospital bed that night, waiting for the surgery scheduled for the next morning, she faced the biggest challenge of her young life. The doctors had explained that her recovery would take months, and there was no guarantee that her shoulder would ever be 100% again. Her athletic career at the high school level was essentially over, and her dreams of military service seemed to be slipping away before they had even really begun. Chief Rodriguez visited her the next day, having heard about the injury through the network of military recruiters who had been following Sarah's progress. He found her sitting up in bed, staring out the window with an expression he couldn't quite read. "How are you feeling?" he asked, pulling up a chair beside her bed. Sarah turned to look at him, and for the first time since he had met her, Rodriguez saw uncertainty in her eyes. "Honestly, I'm scared. Not about the pain or the surgery. I can handle that. I'm scared that this means I won't be able to pursue my dream anymore." Rodriguez nodded slowly. He had seen many promising young recruits derailed by injuries, and he knew how devastating it could be. But he had also learned something important during his years of service. Sometimes the greatest tests came not during training or combat, but during the quiet moments when everything seemed lost. "Sarah," he said, his voice gentle but firm, "I want you to remember something. Being a SEAL isn't about having a perfect body or never getting injured. It's about what you do when things go wrong. It's about how you respond when life knocks you down. And right now, you have an opportunity to show what you're really made of." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Your real training isn't starting when you get to boot camp or BUD/S. It's starting right now, in this hospital bed. How you handle this recovery, how you adapt to your limitations, how you find new ways to pursue your goals. That's what will determine whether you have what it takes to be a SEAL." Sarah listened to every word, feeling something shift inside her chest. The fear and uncertainty didn't disappear completely, but they were joined by something else, a familiar sense of determination that she had felt since childhood. She realized that Chief Rodriguez was right. This wasn't the end of her journey. It was just another obstacle to overcome. "What do I do?" she asked. The surgery went better than expected, but the recovery was brutal in ways Sarah had never anticipated. The physical pain was manageable. She had always been good at dealing with discomfort, but the mental challenge of being forced into inactivity was almost unbearable. For someone who had spent years training her body to peak performance, suddenly, being unable to do a single push-up felt like torture. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the orthopedic surgeon who had performed the operation, was initially skeptical of Sarah's aggressive rehabilitation goals. Most teenagers would have been content to regain basic function and get back to normal activities. But Sarah wasn't interested in normal. She wanted to come back stronger than before. "You need to understand, Dr." Walsh explained during a follow-up appointment 2 weeks after surgery. "This type of injury often ends athletic careers. Even with perfect rehabilitation, there's a good chance you'll never have full range of motion again. You need to adjust your expectations." Sarah listened politely, but something in her expression told Dr. Walsh that the warning wasn't being taken seriously. "Doctor," Sarah said when the surgeon finished speaking, "I appreciate your medical expertise, and I'll follow all of your instructions exactly. But I need you to understand something too. Failure isn't an option for me. Whatever it takes to get back to 100%, that's what I'm going to do." Dr. Walsh had worked with many athletes over the years, and she was familiar with the competitive mindset that drove them to push beyond normal limits. But there was something different about this teenage girl, a calm certainty that was both impressive and slightly unsettling. Against her better judgment, Dr. Walsh found herself believing that Sarah might actually be able to achieve what seemed impossible. The rehabilitation process began slowly, with basic range of motion exercises that left Sarah frustrated and exhausted. Simple movements that had once been automatic now required intense concentration and effort. Physical therapist Marcus Johnson, a former college football player who specialized in sports injuries, quickly realized he was dealing with an unusual patient. Most people I work with are trying to get back to where they were before their injury, Marcus explained to Sarah during their third session. But you seem to be aiming for something even higher. What exactly are you training for? Sarah explained her goal of becoming a Navy SEAL, and Marcus's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He had worked with plenty of athletes who had big dreams, but he had never encountered someone with such a specific and challenging objective. More importantly, he had never worked with someone who approached rehabilitation with the same intensity most people reserved for competition. All right, Marcus said, setting down his clipboard and giving Sarah his full attention. If that's really your goal, then we need to completely rethink your recovery plan. Standard rehabilitation isn't going to be enough. We're going to have to push boundaries and explore techniques that most patients would never attempt. This was exactly what Sarah wanted to hear. Together, she and Marcus developed a recovery program that was part physical therapy, part military-style training, and part experimental sports science. They worked on rebuilding not just her shoulder strength, but her overall conditioning, focusing specifically on the types of movements and stresses she would encounter during SEAL training. While her body slowly healed, Sarah threw herself into other aspects of preparation that didn't require perfect physical condition. She started learning foreign languages, beginning with Spanish, which was easy given her family background, and moving on to Arabic and Mandarin. She studied military history with the same intensity she had once devoted to physical training, reading everything she could find about special operations tactics and strategy. Chief Rodriguez stayed in touch throughout her recovery, checking in every few weeks to monitor her progress and provide encouragement. He was impressed by how Sarah had adapted her training approach to work around her limitations. Many people would have used the injury as an excuse to give up or postpone their dreams, but Sarah had found ways to keep moving toward her goal even when traditional training wasn't possible. You know, Rodriguez said during one of their phone conversations, this experience might actually make you a better SEAL candidate. You're learning adaptability and mental toughness in ways that most recruits never encounter during their preparation. These are lessons you can't get from a textbook or a training manual. 6 months after her surgery, Sarah achieved something that surprised even Dr. Walsh. She regained 98% of her shoulder function. The remaining limitations were so minor that they would have been unnoticeable to anyone except Sarah herself, who could detect the slight difference in her throwing motion and the occasional stiffness after intense workouts. But Sarah wasn't satisfied with 98%. She continued working with Marcus, pushing her rehabilitation even further, developing new exercises and techniques to address the tiny functional gaps that remained. She became obsessed with perfection, not out of vanity, but because she knew that SEAL training would expose any weakness, no matter how small. Her senior year of high school was unlike anything her classmates experienced. While they worried about college applications and prom dates, Sarah was completing a training regimen that would have challenged professional athletes. She woke up at 4:30 every morning for a swimming workout, attended classes during the day, spent her lunch periods in the weight room, and devoted her evenings to running, combat training, and academic study. The swimming had become particularly important to Sarah, partly because it was excellent rehabilitation for her shoulder, but mostly because water confidence was crucial for SEAL training. She joined the school swim team despite having no previous competitive experience, and her coaches were amazed by her rapid improvement. Sarah approached swimming the same way she approached everything else, with complete dedication and an unwillingness to accept mediocrity. Within 6 months, she went from being unable to complete a single lap without stopping to swimming continuous miles in open water. Her technique wasn't pretty. She had started too late to develop the smooth stroke mechanics of lifelong swimmers, but her endurance and mental toughness were extraordinary. During team practices, Sarah would often continue swimming long after the official workout ended, doing extra laps until the pool staff turned off the lights. Coach Rebecca Santos, who had been coaching high school swimming for 15 years, had never encountered an athlete quite like Sarah. She doesn't swim like someone who learned the sport as a teenager, Santos explained to her assistant coach. She swims like someone who needs swimming to survive. There's a desperation in her technique that's actually beautiful to watch. The academic side of Sarah's preparation was equally intense. She maintained a perfect GPA while taking advanced placement courses in mathematics, science, and history. She knew that modern military operations required intelligence as much as physical capability, and she wanted to be prepared for any challenge that might arise during her service. Her guidance counselor, Mrs. Patricia Chun, initially tried to talk Sarah out of her military plans, suggesting that someone with her academic record should consider college scholarships and civilian career paths. But, after several conversations, Mrs. Chun came to understand that Sarah wasn't avoiding other opportunities. She was specifically choosing the path that aligned with her deepest values and sense of purpose. Sarah isn't like other students I've worked with, Mrs. Chun told Sarah's parents during a conference meeting. Most teenagers are trying to figure out who they want to be. Sarah already knows exactly who she is and what she wants to accomplish. My job isn't to change her direction. It's to help her succeed on the path she's chosen. As graduation approached, Sarah began the formal process of enlisting in the Navy. She met with recruiters, took the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, and completed the physical fitness assessments required for special operations consideration. Every step of the process confirmed what she already knew. She was as ready as anyone could be for the challenges ahead. The physical fitness tests were particularly satisfying for Sarah, not because they were difficult, but because they proved that her recovery had been complete. She scored in the top 1% of all test takers, performing better than most male candidates, and setting unofficial records in several categories. More importantly, her injured shoulder showed no signs of weakness or limitation during any of the exercises. But it was during the psychological evaluations that Sarah truly distinguished herself. Military psychologists were trained to identify candidates who possessed the mental resilience necessary for special operations, and they quickly recognized that Sarah was exceptional in this regard. Her injury and recovery had provided her with real-world experience in overcoming adversity, something that most 18-year-old recruits lacked. Dr. Amanda Foster, the psychologist who conducted Sarah's final evaluation, was particularly intrigued by Sarah's motivation and mental approach. Most candidates talk about wanting to serve their country or prove their toughness, Dr. Foster noted in her report. This candidate demonstrates a deeper understanding of service as a calling rather than a challenge to be conquered. Her maturity level and psychological resilience are remarkable for someone her age. The night before leaving for boot camp, Sarah spent her final evening at home with her family. They had a quiet dinner together, sharing memories and talking about the future. Carlos presented Sarah with a small flag that had flown over his unit's base in Vietnam, something he had kept for nearly 20 years. "Mija," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I carried this flag through some of the hardest times of my life. It reminded me that I was representing something bigger than myself. I want you to have it now, to remind you of the same thing." Maria had struggled with Sarah's decision throughout high school, worried about the dangers and sacrifices that military service would entail. But, as she watched her daughter's quiet confidence and unwavering determination, she finally understood that this wasn't just a career choice for Sarah, it was who she was meant to be. "Promise me you'll be careful," Maria said, hugging her daughter tightly. "Promise me you'll remember that your family loves you and wants you to come home safely." Sarah returned the embrace, feeling the weight of her parents' love and support. "I promise, Mom. Everything I've learned, everything I've prepared for, it's all been leading to this moment. I'm ready." Boot camp at Naval Station Great Lakes was unlike anything Sarah had experienced, but she had expected that. What she hadn't anticipated was how much her injury and recovery would actually help her during the intense 8 weeks of basic training. While other recruits struggled with the mental pressure of being constantly challenged and criticized, Sarah found herself drawing on lessons learned during those dark months of rehabilitation. Petty Officer First Class Daniel Torres was Sarah's company commander, a tough veteran with 12 years of service who had trained thousands of recruits. Within the first week, he noticed something different about Martinez. She never complained, never made excuses, and seemed immune to the psychological pressure that broke down most new sailors. "Most recruits spend their energy fighting the system," Torres explained to his fellow instructors during their weekly evaluation meeting. "They resist the discipline, argue with instructions, and waste mental energy on things they can't control. But Martinez just absorbs everything and keeps moving forward. It's like she's already learned lessons that take most people years to figure out. Sarah's approach to boot camp was methodical and strategic. She had studied military training extensively during her preparation, and she understood that the physical challenges were only part of the equation. The real test was psychological. Could she maintain focus and performance while under constant stress and pressure? Her shoulder held up perfectly under the demanding physical training, but Sarah never took that for granted. Every morning before reveille, she would wake up 15 minutes early to do gentle stretching and mobility exercises, maintaining the rehabilitation routine that had become second nature. Her bunkmates thought she was crazy for voluntarily adding more activity to their already exhausting schedule. But Sarah knew that preventing re-injury was crucial to her long-term goals. The swimming portion of boot camp was where Sarah truly excelled. The Navy required all recruits to pass basic water survival tests, but Sarah's performance went far beyond the minimum standards. She could swim farther and faster than any other recruit in her company, and her comfort in the water was obvious to everyone who watched her. Swimming instructor Chief Petty Officer Lisa Park had been teaching water survival for 8 years, and she had never seen a recruit with Sarah's combination of technique and endurance. Martinez doesn't just swim, Park told her supervisor. She becomes part of the water. There's something almost supernatural about her comfort level in aquatic environments. During one particularly challenging exercise, recruits were required to swim 50 meters while wearing full combat gear. Most struggled to complete the distance, and several had to be pulled from the pool by safety divers. Sarah not only completed the swim easily, but she volunteered to help struggling classmates by swimming alongside them and offering encouragement. It was this willingness to help others that really set Sarah apart from typical high-performing recruits. Many of the strongest candidates focused solely on their own success, viewing their classmates as competition. But Sarah seemed to understand intuitively that military effectiveness depended on team performance, not individual achievement. Recruit Michael Thompson was struggling with almost every aspect of boot camp. He was out of shape, afraid of the water, and increasingly discouraged by his poor performance. Most recruits ignored Thompson, viewing him as dead weight who would probably be sent home before graduation. But Sarah saw something else, someone who needed help from a shipmate. "Thompson," Sarah said one evening as they prepared for lights out, "meet me in the head in 10 minutes. I want to show you some breathing techniques that might help with your swimming anxiety." For the next hour, Sarah worked with Thompson on basic water confidence exercises, sharing techniques she had learned during her own swimming development. She didn't do this for recognition or reward. She did it because she understood that a team was only as strong as its weakest member. The transformation in Thompson over the following weeks was remarkable. His swimming improved dramatically, his confidence grew, and his overall performance began to meet Navy standards. More importantly for Sarah, she learned valuable lessons about leadership and the responsibility that came with superior capability. Chief Torres observed these interactions with interest. Leadership potential was one of the key qualities he evaluated in recruits, and Sarah was demonstrating natural abilities that usually took years to develop. She led by example rather than by giving orders, and she earned respect through her actions rather than demanding it through authority. But it was during the final weeks of boot camp that Sarah faced her most significant challenge. The company was participating in battle stations, a comprehensive exercise designed to test everything recruits had learned during their training. Teams of sailors had to work together to complete complex scenarios under extreme time pressure and stress. Sarah's team was assigned a simulated emergency scenario. Their ship had taken damage from enemy fire, the engine room was flooding, and they had wounded personnel who needed immediate medical attention. The exercise was designed to be nearly impossible to complete successfully. The point was to see how recruits responded when faced with overwhelming challenges. As team leader for this particular scenario, Sarah had to coordinate multiple simultaneous operations while dealing with confusing and contradictory information from exercise controllers. The noise level was deafening, the lighting was deliberately poor, and every few minutes new problems would be introduced to increase the stress level. Halfway through the exercise, while Sarah was directing the medical team's efforts to stabilize a simulated casualty, she felt a familiar twinge in her shoulder. The combination of physical strain and awkward positioning had aggravated her old injury, and she could feel the joint beginning to stiffen and ache. For a moment, Sarah experienced a flash of the same fear that had gripped her in the hospital 2 years earlier. What if her shoulder failed her at the crucial moment? What if the injury that she thought she had overcome completely came back to derail everything she had worked toward? But then, she remembered Chief Rodriguez's words about what separated real SEALs from everyone else: the ability to keep going when everything inside you was screaming to quit. She took a deep breath, mentally noted the pain, and then ignored it completely. There was a mission to complete, and her team was counting on her leadership. Sarah adjusted her approach to minimize stress on her shoulder while continuing to direct the exercise. She delegated more of the physical tasks to other team members while focusing on coordination and decision-making. Rather than trying to do everything herself, she leveraged the strengths of her entire team to overcome the challenges they faced. In the end, Sarah's team was one of only 3 out of 20 that successfully completed the battle stations exercise. But more impressive than their success was the way they had achieved it, through genuine teamwork and adaptive leadership rather than individual heroics. After the exercise, Chief Torres pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Martinez," he said, "I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've seen a lot of outstanding recruits. But you have something special. You don't just perform well under pressure. You actually get better when things get difficult. That's a rare quality, and it's exactly what the Navy needs in its special operations communities." He paused, studying Sarah's face to gauge her reaction. "I'm recommending you for accelerated advancement and special operations screening. You have the potential to go as far as you want in this Navy, and I think you know where you want to go." Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction and gratitude, but she kept her expression neutral. "Thank you, Chief Torres. I appreciate your confidence in me, and I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Torres replied. "But remember something. Getting to BUD/S is just the beginning. The real challenges are still ahead of you. Use the time between now and then to keep preparing, because SEAL training will test you in ways that boot camp can't even touch." Graduation day arrived with typical Navy ceremony and precision. Sarah's parents had flown out from Texas to watch their daughter complete this first major milestone in her military career. As she stood at attention in her dress uniform, Sarah felt the weight of everything she had accomplished and everything that lay ahead. But the moment that meant the most to her came not during the formal ceremony, but afterward, when Chief Torres approached her family. He shook hands with Carlos and Maria, then looked them directly in the eyes. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez," he said, "you should be incredibly proud of your daughter. In 12 years of training recruits, I have never worked with someone who combines Sarah's level of individual excellence with such genuine care for others. She's going to make an outstanding sailor and an exceptional leader." Carlos felt tears forming in his eyes as he thought about the long journey that had brought them to this moment. The teenage girl who had been injured during a wrestling match had become a confident, capable young woman ready to take on any challenge the military could present. That evening, as Sarah prepared to leave for her first assignment at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, she reflected on how much she had changed since that day in the hospital. The injury that had seemed like such a devastating setback had actually taught her the most important lesson of her life: that setbacks were just opportunities to prove what she was really made of. She still had a long way to go before she could call herself a Navy SEAL. BUD/S training lay ahead, along with challenges that would make boot camp seem easy by comparison. But Sarah was no longer the frightened teenager worried about whether an injury might end her dreams. She was a United States sailor, trained and ready to face whatever obstacles stood between her and her ultimate goal. The night before reporting to Coronado, Sarah called Chief Rodriguez to thank him for his guidance and support. "Chief," she said, "I want you to know that everything you told me that day in the hospital came true. The injury wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of learning what I was really capable of." Naval Amphibious Base Coronado looked exactly like Sarah had imagined it during years of preparation. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly to the west, The beach where countless SEAL candidates had tested their limits gleamed white in the California sun, and everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of the intense training that took place here daily. Sarah arrived 3 months before her scheduled BUD/S class began, assigned to a preparatory unit that would help her transition from basic naval duties to the specialized world of special operations. She was one of only 15 sailors selected for this preliminary program, all of them candidates who had shown exceptional potential during their initial training. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell ran the preparatory program, and he made it clear from day one that being selected was just the beginning. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the assembled candidates on their first morning, "you are here because someone thinks you might have what it takes to become a Navy SEAL. But I'm here to tell you that thinking and doing are two very different things. Over the next 3 months, we're going to find out which one of you actually belongs here." The preparatory training was designed to bridge the gap between regular Navy fitness standards and the extraordinary demands of BUD/S. Candidates swam in the ocean daily, ran on soft sand that made every step a struggle, and participated in team-building exercises that were more intense than anything they had experienced during boot camp. For Sarah, the program felt like a continuation of the preparation she had been doing since high school. Her shoulder performed flawlessly during all the physical activities, showing no signs of the injury that had once threatened to end her dreams. More importantly, she was finally training alongside others who shared her level of commitment and understanding of what they were trying to achieve. One of her fellow candidates was Petty Officer 3rd Class David Kim, a former college wrestler who had enlisted specifically to pursue SEAL training. Kim was impressed by Sarah's performance and curious about her background, particularly when he noticed the way she moved during water exercises. "Martinez," Kim said one evening as they cooled down after a particularly brutal swimming workout, "where did you learn to swim like that? You move through the water like you were born in it." Sarah smiled, remembering the countless hours she had spent in pools and open water during her recovery and preparation. "I learned the hard way," she replied. "I had to rebuild everything from scratch after an injury, and I guess that forced me to really understand the fundamentals." Kim nodded thoughtfully. "That explains a lot. Most of us learned to swim as kids, so we have habits and techniques that are hard to break. But you swim like someone who thought about every single movement. It's incredibly efficient." This conversation gave Sarah insight into one of her unexpected advantages. While other candidates brought natural athletic ability and years of sports experience, Sarah brought something different: the analytical approach and mental discipline that came from rebuilding herself after adversity. She had learned to break down complex physical skills into component parts and systematically improve each element. The preparatory program also included extensive academic training covering topics that would be crucial during SEAL operations. Sarah excelled in classes on navigation, communications, and tactical planning, drawing on the years of self-directed study she had completed during high school. Her instructors noted her ability to absorb complex information quickly and apply it practically during exercises. But it was during combat swimming training that Sarah truly distinguished herself. The program required candidates to swim long distances in challenging conditions while carrying equipment and navigating to specific objectives. These exercises combined physical endurance, technical skill, and mental toughness in ways that eliminated many otherwise strong candidates. Chief Petty Officer Robert Stone, who supervised the combat swimming program, had been training SEAL candidates for 8 years. He had developed an eye for identifying which sailors possessed the rare combination of water skills and psychological resilience necessary for underwater operations. "Martinez has something I don't see very often," Stone told Commander Mitchell during a weekly evaluation meeting. "She doesn't just swim well, she thinks like a combat swimmer. She understands intuitively how to manage her energy, navigate efficiently, and stay calm under stress." Most candidates take months to develop that level of water confidence, if they ever develop it at all. Stone's assessment proved accurate during a particularly challenging exercise that took place during the program's final month. Candidates were required to swim 2 miles in open ocean at night, carrying a 40-pound pack, while navigating to a series of checkpoints using only basic compass techniques. The exercise began just after sunset, with waves running 4 to 5 feet and water temperature in the mid-60s. Several candidates struggled immediately with the combination of cold water, heavy equipment, and limited visibility. By the halfway point, 3 had been pulled from the water by safety boats after showing signs of hypothermia and exhaustion. Sarah approached the exercise with the same methodical focus she brought to everything else. She had spent hours studying ocean conditions and navigation techniques, and she understood exactly how to pace herself for a swim of this distance and difficulty. More importantly, she had learned to stay calm and think clearly even when her body was under extreme stress. As the exercise progressed, Sarah found herself swimming alongside Kim and 2 other strong candidates. They had naturally formed a loose group, helping each other navigate and maintaining communication despite the challenging conditions. This informal teamwork became crucial when they encountered an unexpected problem at the 3rd checkpoint. The checkpoint marker that candidates were supposed to locate had been displaced by the waves and was nowhere to be found in its expected position. Several other groups had already given up and signaled for assistance, but Sarah suggested they continue searching in an expanded pattern rather than quit immediately. "The marker has to be here somewhere," she told her teammates as they treaded water in the darkness. "We know our navigation was accurate, so let's think about where the current might have pushed it." Using her understanding of local water conditions, Sarah led the group in a systematic search that eventually located the displaced marker nearly 100 meters from its original position. Their persistence allowed them to complete the full exercise successfully, while most other candidates had been forced to accept partial credit. After the exercise, Chief Stone pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "Martinez," he said, "what you did out there tonight wasn't just good swimming or good navigation. That was good leadership under pressure. You kept your team focused and motivated when it would have been easy to give up. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes the difference between a good candidate and a great SEAL." Sarah felt a surge of pride and confidence, but she also understood that this was just the beginning. The preparatory program had been designed to get candidates ready for BUD/S, but BUD/S itself would be exponentially more challenging. Everything she had accomplished so far was just proof that she deserved the opportunity to attempt the real test. As the preparatory program drew to a close, candidates received their official assignments to specific BUD/S classes. Sarah was assigned to Class 362, which would begin in 6 weeks. The timing was perfect. It would give her a brief opportunity to visit home and spend time with her family before beginning the most challenging phase of her military career. Commander Mitchell conducted exit interviews with each candidate, providing feedback and final guidance before they moved on to BUD/S training. When Sarah's turn came, Mitchell was direct and honest in his assessment. "Martinez," he said, "you've performed exceptionally well during this program. Your physical capabilities are outstanding, your water skills are among the best I've seen, and you've shown genuine leadership potential. But I want you to understand something about what comes next." He paused, making sure he had her full attention. "BUD/S will test you in ways that nothing in your life has prepared you for. Not your injury, not your recovery, not this preparatory program. The instructors will find your weaknesses and exploit them relentlessly. They will push you beyond what you think is possible, and then push you further. Are you ready for that?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "Sir, I've been preparing for this challenge my entire life. I know it won't be easy, and I know there's no guarantee I'll succeed. But I also know that I won't quit. Whatever it takes, however hard it gets, I'll find a way to keep going." Mitchell smiled slightly. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But the first day of BUD/S Class 362 began at 4:30 in the morning with the sound of instructors banging metal trash can lids together outside the barracks. Sarah had been awake for an hour already, mentally preparing for what she knew would be the most challenging day of her life so far. Around her, 67 other candidates scrambled to get dressed and form up in the darkness. Senior Chief Petty Officer Marcus Wright stood before the assembled class as the sun began to rise over the Pacific. Wright was a legend in the SEAL community, with over 15 years of operational experience and a reputation for identifying which candidates possessed the mental toughness necessary to complete training. His eyes swept across the formation, and Sarah felt as though he was looking directly into her soul. "Ladies and gentlemen," Wright announced, his voice carrying easily across the silent formation. "Welcome to basic underwater demolition/SEAL training. For the next 26 weeks, this will be the most important thing in your lives. Some of you will discover that you have what it takes to join the most elite fighting force in the world. Most of you will discover that you do not." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "The statistics are simple. Roughly 75% of you will not complete this training. You will quit, or you will be dropped for performance, or you will be injured and medically disqualified. The question is not whether you are strong enough or smart enough or tough enough. The question is whether you want it badly enough to endure things that will test the very limits of your human capacity." Sarah felt a familiar sensation in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced during her injury and recovery, the same determination that had driven her through years of preparation. She understood that Senior Chief Wright was not trying to intimidate them with empty threats. He was simply stating facts about what lay ahead. The first phase of BUD/S training was designed to test physical conditioning and mental resilience through increasingly difficult challenges. Candidates ran on soft sand, swam in cold ocean water, performed endless calisthenics, and participated in team exercises that required perfect coordination under extreme stress. The pace was relentless, with no time for rest or reflection. Sarah's shoulder held up perfectly during the initial weeks of training, showing no signs of weakness despite the intense physical demands. Her years of careful rehabilitation and conditioning had prepared her body for exactly this kind of stress. More importantly, her experience of rebuilding herself after injury had taught her how to manage pain and discomfort without letting it affect her performance. But it was during the fourth week of training that Sarah faced her first real crisis. The class was participating in surf passage, an exercise where teams of candidates had to carry heavy rubber boats through breaking waves and then paddle to objectives offshore. The surf was running 8 to 10 feet, and the water temperature was in the low 60s. Sarah's boat crew was struggling with their timing as they approached the surf zone. The waves were larger and more powerful than anything they had practiced in, and several crews had already been flipped and scattered by the massive breakers. As they paddled toward the beach, Sarah could see a particularly large set of waves building on the horizon. "Get ready," shouted boat crew leader Petty Officer Second Class Anthony Rodriguez. "This is going to be rough." The first wave hit their boat like a moving wall of water, lifting the front end 6 feet into the air before slamming it back down. The impact sent shock waves through the boat and into Sarah's body, jarring her injured shoulder in a way that sent alarm signals straight to her brain. For a moment, she felt the old familiar fear. What if her shoulder failed her at the crucial moment? But instead of panicking, Sarah drew on everything she had learned about managing adversity. She acknowledged the pain, assessed her actual capability, and then focused completely on the task at hand. Her shoulder was sore, but it was still functional. She could still paddle, still carry her share of the load, still contribute to her team's success. The second wave was even larger than the first, and it caught their boat at a bad angle. The boat flipped completely over, throwing all 6 crew members into the churning water. Sarah found herself tumbling in the underwater chaos, disoriented and struggling to find the surface. Her shoulder screamed in protest as she fought against the powerful currents. This was the moment that separated real SEAL candidates from everyone else. In the confusion and violence of the surf zone, with water forcing its way into her lungs and her body being battered by waves, Sarah had to make a choice. She could focus on her pain and fear, or she could focus on what needed to be done. Sarah chose to act. She oriented herself toward the surface, kicked strongly toward the light, and broke through into the air. Around her, the other members of her boat crew were struggling in the foam, some of them clearly in distress. Without hesitation, Sarah swam toward the nearest candidate who was having trouble staying afloat. "I've got you," she shouted over the roar of the waves, grabbing Seaman Rodriguez by his life vest and helping him get his head above water. Together, they swam toward the overturned boat, where the rest of their crew was gathering to flip it upright and continue the exercise. The entire incident lasted less than 3 minutes, but it revealed something crucial about Sarah's character under extreme stress. When everything went wrong, when her old injury flared up, when her teammates needed help, she didn't hesitate or think about her own comfort. She simply did what needed to be done. Senior Chief Wright had observed the entire incident from the beach, and he made a note in his evaluation book. Later, during his weekly assessment meeting with other instructors, he would describe Sarah as someone who performed better when things got worse, one of the highest compliments that could be paid to a SEAL candidate. As the weeks of first phase training continued, Sarah's reputation among her classmates grew. She was not the strongest candidate in the class, nor the fastest runner or the most naturally gifted athlete. But she was the one who never seemed to break, never complained, and never gave up. When other candidates were struggling, Sarah found ways to help them. When exercises seemed impossible, Sarah found ways to complete them. The turning point came during Hell Week, the legendary 5-day period where candidates are pushed to their absolute limits with minimal sleep and constant physical challenges. By Wednesday of Hell Week, the class had already lost 15 candidates who had chosen to quit rather than continue. Sarah was exhausted in ways she had never imagined possible. Her body ached from head to toe, her shoulder was stiff and painful, and her mind was clouded by sleep deprivation and constant stress. During one particularly brutal exercise that required candidates to carry telephone poles while running on the beach, she felt herself beginning to reach her breaking point. For a moment, Sarah understood why so many candidates chose to quit. The instructors made it clear that the pain could end immediately. All any candidate had to do was ring the brass bell 3 times and walk away from training. In her current state of exhaustion and discomfort, that option seemed incredibly tempting. But then, Sarah remembered something that her physical therapist Marcus had told her during her darkest days of rehabilitation. The difference between people who recover completely and people who don't isn't talent or luck. It's the willingness to keep working even when you can't see any progress being made. Sarah realized that Hell Week was exactly like her injury recovery, a test of her ability to keep moving forward when everything inside her wanted to quit. She had passed that test once before, and she could pass it again. Her shoulder hurt, but it was still functional. Her body was exhausted, but it could still perform. Her mind was clouded, but it could still think clearly enough to complete the required tasks. Instead of focusing on her discomfort, Sarah began focusing on her teammates. She started encouraging other candidates who were struggling, sharing water and food when possible, and helping to coordinate team efforts during exercises. She found that helping others actually made her own suffering more manageable, giving her a sense of purpose that transcended her individual pain. By Friday morning, when Hell Week finally ended, Sarah was one of 38 candidates who had successfully completed the ordeal. She had proven to herself and her instructors that she possessed the mental toughness necessary to endure anything that SEAL training could present. More importantly, she had learned that her old injury was no longer a source of vulnerability. It had become a source of strength. The remaining phases of BUD/S training, diving operations, and land warfare presented new challenges but never again tested Sarah's fundamental resolve in the same way. She had discovered during Hell Week that she was capable of enduring far more than she had ever imagined, and this knowledge gave her confidence to tackle any obstacle. During dive phase, Sarah's comfort in the water and her ability to stay calm under stress made her one of the top performers in the class. The underwater exercises that eliminated several other candidates were routine for someone who had spent years developing water confidence and breath control. Land warfare phase allowed Sarah to demonstrate the tactical knowledge and leadership skills she had been developing since high school. Her ability to think clearly under pressure and coordinate team efforts made her a natural choice for leadership positions during training exercises. When BUD/S Class 362 finally graduated 6 months after beginning, Sarah was one of only 26 candidates who had successfully completed the entire program. She had achieved something that less than 1% of military personnel would ever accomplish, and she had done it while overcoming a significant injury that many people had believed would end her dreams. The graduation ceremony was attended by Senior Chief Wright, Commander Mitchell from the preparatory program, and dozens of family members who had traveled from around the country to witness this historic moment. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, tears streaming down their faces as they watched their daughter receive the sealed trident that marked her as one of America's most elite warriors. But the moment that meant the most to Sarah came after the formal ceremony, when Senior Chief Wright approached her for a private conversation. "Martinez," he said, "I want you to know something. In 20 years of training SEAL candidates, I have rarely seen someone demonstrate the kind of mental toughness and leadership that you showed during this course. You didn't just complete BUD/S, you excelled at it." He paused, studying her face. "But, more importantly, you proved something that a lot of people didn't believe was possible. You showed that someone can come back from a serious injury and not just survive SEAL training, but thrive in it. You've opened doors for future candidates who might face similar challenges." Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment, but also humility. She understood that graduating from BUD/S was not the end of her journey, but the beginning. She would now move on to SEAL qualification training, where she would learn the specialized skills necessary for operational deployment. Eventually, she would join a SEAL team and participate in real-world missions where the stakes would be higher than anything she had faced during training. That evening, as Sarah stood on the beach at Coronado watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, she reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 5 years ago, she had been a frightened teenager in a hospital bed, worried that an injury might end her dreams before they really began. Now she was a Navy SEAL, one of the most elite warriors in the world. Her shoulder, the source of so much fear and uncertainty, felt strong and stable as she moved through the basic exercises that had become routine during her training. The injury that had once seemed like such a devastating setback had taught her the most valuable lesson of her military career, that setbacks were just opportunities to prove what she was really made of. Chief Rodriguez had been right all those years ago when he told her that SEALs keep going no matter what. Sarah had learned that this wasn't just a slogan or a motivational phrase. It was a fundamental truth about human potential and the power of determination to overcome any obstacle. As she prepared for the next phase of her career, Sarah knew that there would be new challenges ahead, new opportunities to prove herself, and new ways to serve her country. But she also knew that she was ready for whatever came next. She had learned to thrive in the face of adversity, to lead when others needed guidance, and to keep moving forward when everything seemed impossible. The teenager who had been injured during a high school wrestling match was gone, replaced by a confident, capable woman who understood that true strength came not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them head-on and finding ways to prevail. Sarah Martinez had become living proof that sometimes the greatest achievements come from overcoming the greatest obstacles, and that Navy SEALs really do keep going no matter what. Remember, saying it and doing it are two different things. In 6 months, we'll know which one you really meant. Sarah's brief visit home to Texas was bittersweet. She was proud to share her accomplishments with her family, but she was also acutely aware that the next phase of her journey would be more dangerous and demanding than anything she had faced before. Her parents could see the change in her. She was more confident and mature, but there was also an intensity that hadn't been there before. "Mija," Carlos said on her last evening home, "I can see that the Navy has made you stronger, but I also see something in your eyes that worries me. Don't lose yourself in pursuit of your goals. Remember that being tough doesn't mean you have to carry everything alone." Sarah hugged her father tightly. "Dad, I promise I'll remember who I am and where I came from. But I also need you to understand that this is who I'm meant to be. Everything that's happened, the injury, the recovery, all the training, it's all been leading to this moment." As she prepared to return to Coronado for the start of BUD/S training, Sarah felt a complex mixture of excitement, nervousness, and determination. She knew that many exceptional candidates would not complete the program, and there was no guarantee that she would be among those who succeeded. But she also knew that she had prepared as thoroughly as possible and that she possessed qualities that couldn't be taught: resilience, adaptability, and an unshakable commitment to her goals. The night before BUD/S Class 362 began, Sarah lay in her bunk at the base housing facility and thought about the long journey that had brought her to this point. 3 years ago, she had been a frightened teenager in a hospital bed, worried that an injury might end her dreams before they really began. Now she was about to attempt one of the most challenging training programs in the world, and she had never felt more ready for anything in her life. She thought about Chief Rodriguez's words from that day in the hospital. Being a SEAL isn't about having a perfect body or never getting injured. It's about what you do when things go wrong. Sarah realized that everything she had learned about overcoming adversity was about to be put to the ultimate test. But she also knew that she was no longer the same person who had been injured during a high school wrestling match. That experience had forged her into someone who understood that true strength came not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them head-on and finding ways to prevail. Tomorrow, she would begin the final phase of her journey toward becoming a Navy SEAL. And for the first time in her life, Sarah felt truly ready to prove that some people really do keep going no matter what. Rodriguez smiled on the other end of the phone. "Sarah, I always knew you had it in you. But you had to prove it to yourself first. Now comes the real test. BUD/S will challenge you in ways you can't imagine. But you've already shown that you can overcome anything. Just remember, SEALs keep going no matter what." As Sarah hung up the phone and prepared for sleep, she felt ready for whatever came next. Her shoulder was stronger than it had ever been. Her mind was sharper and more focused, and her determination was unshakable. Tomorrow, she would begin the journey toward becoming one of the military's most elite warriors. And she was finally ready to prove that sometimes the greatest strength comes from overcoming the greatest challenges. That night, Sarah lay in her childhood bedroom for the last time, looking up at the ceiling where she had hung motivational posters and training schedules for the past 3 years. Tomorrow she would begin the journey that would test everything she had built during her recovery and preparation. The injured shoulder that had once seemed like the end of her dreams had become proof of her ability to overcome any obstacle. She thought about Chief Rodriguez's words from that day in the hospital. Your real training isn't starting when you get to boot camp or BUD/S. It's starting right now. Sarah realized that the past 2 years hadn't just been about physical rehabilitation. They had been about developing the mental toughness and adaptability that would define her military career. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace and readiness. The teenager who had been injured during a high school wrestling match was gone, replaced by a young woman who had learned that setbacks were just opportunities to prove what she was really made of. Tomorrow, she would begin the next phase of a journey that had started in a hospital bed, fueled by determination and the unshakable belief that Navy SEALs keep going no matter what. Rodriguez smiled for the first time since entering her room. You do what SEALs always do. You adapt, you overcome, and you keep moving forward. And you remember that the mission is bigger than any individual setback.